Hello, everybody. If you're watching this, you're probably watching the Zoom recording. And my name is Tim Grimes, if you don't know who I am. I'll be getting started momentarily. I just want to see if people are joining me live or not. Otherwise, I will just get going. What we're going to be covering today is a way of integrating a lot of the ideas that I often talk about more thoroughly into our lives. And if you're familiar with my type of work and the stuff that I usually talk about, this shouldn't seem like anything new. But nonetheless, I think that you will find it very helpful. So I'm just going to get rolling. A few people might be joining us still. It's right at the top of the hour here. But I want to begin really briefly, if you are here live, just by letting you know this is being recorded and it will be put on YouTube. So if you do want to share any information or any opinions or have any questions for me, just keep that in mind. You can put those questions in the chat, or you can join me live on this call, but this will be posted on YouTube afterwards. So just be aware, if you want to be kept anonymous, to not use your video, to switch the name that you have in your profile, and just be aware that it will be posted on YouTube. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into this little workshop that we're going to have here. The idea of implementing a lot of these manifesting ideas is often conceptual, in the sense where we find out about various ways to improve our lives by implementing manifesting techniques, and we go about trying to utilize these techniques in a very mental way. However, we get lost in our head a lot of the time when we do this inadvertently. If you're familiar with what I talk about, again, this isn't going to sound new. However, it's very important to realize, I think. Often we prioritize what's going on in our mind over how we feel. And we're going to feel better in general more of the time and more comfortable being who we are in the present moment if we don't prioritize just what's going on in our head, but what's going on in our whole body. So what I want to talk about today is simple ways that we can do that. First of all, if you're familiar with my work, you know that I really advocate playfulness and using movement to become more, you could say, just more present and feel better in the present. I've discussed this at length in my video series, Stop Being Serious. You can go to stopbeingserious.com and watch that whole video series. My book, The Joy of Not Thinking, I talk about using playful movement. When we're moving around, we tend to drop a lot of that overthinking quite naturally. And I'm not going to go into that much detail about doing that today, because I've discussed that so much in other places. What I want to talk about here is kind of just sitting with uncomfortable feelings. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be taking a walk, for instance, and kind of processing an uncomfortable feeling, like, feeling fearful or feeling sad or feeling ashamed or feeling whatever. You could obviously process that when you're moving around, right? But I want to focus on the kind of contemplative aspect of doing this. And the reason I want to do that is because, as I said, when we tend to think about these ideas, we contemplate them mentally and not with the whole body. What we can start to do more of, and I think what will help a lot of us, what certainly has helped me a lot, is simply allowing yourself, when you feel bad and when you have the time to do so, to sit with these uncomfortable feelings. So this is, I say this is a grounding process. And that's what we're doing. We're grounding ourselves when we feel bad. I say that generally speaking, we feel bad, we feel uncomfortable, right? And we allow the feeling to be there. And we process the feeling by just kind of grounding our body and being with it. And by doing that, we change our relationship with the feeling. Again, none of this is new or particularly profound. You've probably heard me or other people talk about this before. The power, the profundity of it is in doing it. And so what we can do, and we'll start by doing this now here, is if we're not already feeling uncomfortable, if we don't already have a feeling of discomfort somewhere that we can sense, let's try to bring a feeling up. We don't have to really intensify it too much, but try to bring up a sensation or a feeling of discomfort that bothers you in your life sometimes, whether that be sadness, fear, feeling alone, feeling ashamed, whatever that uncomfortable feeling may be. Take a moment. You can close your eyes or keep them open. And just bring that feeling up if you can. If 0 would be it's not there at all, and 10 is it's really there, just try to bring it up, at least a couple notches to at least a 3 or 4. I think if we think about it for a second, if we get in our head for a second, we can all do this. We can all bring it up to a 3 or 4. Don't think too hard about it. Just be like, what's something that's made me feel uncomfortable, or I've noticed something that makes me a feeling that makes me uncomfortable. Bring that to mind and then see where it appears, where you feel it in your body. Maybe it, presents itself, you feel it like in your chest area. That is what often happens to me. It's like I'll feel it in my, my chest area, kind of near my heart, but more like in the middle of my chest. Other people will be in the heart. For a lot of people, they might feel uncomfortable feelings a lot of the time. And obviously uncomfortable feelings can be in different parts of our bodies, but generally speaking, like, a lot of the discomfort they feel physically when they feel an uncomfortable emotion will be like in their stomach area, right? Some people get really jittery, like their legs are shaking a lot. They feel it like in their legs, their hands, the tip of their fingers. Other people will be like in their throat area, where that discomfort seems to be predominantly focused. And we don't have to isolate it. It's just, we're just looking for like a general, we're just trying to notice more where it is in the body. Other people will be like in the head, like, perhaps racing thoughts, for instance, often like racing thoughts, and people feel like their heads, overwhelmed or buzzing in an uncomfortable way. It could be the front of the face, like the forehead area, it could be in the back of the head. It could be anywhere in the body. Again, what we're trying to do right now is just spend a few moments thinking about an uncomfortable feeling that we've had probably recently, or that perhaps we've noticed presents itself often in our life, and bringing it up. You can bring it up to, this level 3 or 4, or if you want, you could escalate it up to level 6, 7, 8, 9, or even 10. But the point is just to notice it, see where it mainly is in the body. And you might see it moving around. Like, I work with people that are like, oh, it's in my chest area. Now it's moving up to like my throat and my head. And it's just this whole area here, or it's like it's in the whole front of my body. Again, just generally notice where it is. you'll see already by us doing this that this is a little bit different than like, playfully moving around or, walking and trying to do this. Because like when we're moving around a lot, we're not able to kind of be still and notice where the feeling is manifesting in the body. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So we can kind of, be more reflective with it and more conversational with it. It's not to say that, again, we can't do it while we're walking or something like that. It's just, it's more intimate when we do it like this usually. So wherever the feeling is, wherever that discomfort is, feel it right now. You should be able to feel it. You should be able to feel it. So just feeling the discomfort, even if it's like minor, even if it is only like a 3 or 4 on a scale of 10, just feeling it, believe it or not, is a really effective way to start to feel better more of the time. As strange as that might sound. So often we're scared to look at these feelings, reticent to look at these feelings. Now, consciously, we are saying, okay, I'm going to look at this feeling. And when we look at it, what we do not want to do is create a narrative in our head about it right now. We're not thinking, oh, this feeling is in my chest. Why is it here? There's something wrong with me, da, da, da. We drop all that. We drop the overthinking, the mentation about the feeling. We drop that judgment about the feeling when we're doing this type of grounding work and exercise. So there's a strange feeling in my stomach. I'm not going to judge it. I'm going to allow it to be there. And we just feel it. Obviously, if it helps, you can breathe deeply. You can like breathe into the feeling. You don't have to do anything like that. It's just sometimes that makes us more present by breathing into the feeling. So if it's like in the throat area, you can imagine breathing into it and feel your breath going in, down like your windpipe, like feel it pass through the throat. If it's in your stomach, you can imagine, you can feel the breath going into your body, down to the stomach. You can do things like that if it helps. Again, there's a ton of flexibility here. The key is just allow the feeling to be there without judging it, So when we do this right away, pretty much, or within a minute or two, we notice that even though we might feel really uncomfortable, and there's this uncomfortable feeling wherever it is in the body, we're here still, we're breathing still, and we are okay. We're okay. This discomfort, this uncomfortable feeling is still in my stomach, but I'm not judging it for being there. I'm not interpreting what that means about me and why that makes me a bad person or whatever. I'm just allowing the feeling to be there. Now, again, this interplays with what I often talk about with just allowing yourself to sit or lie down and just vibe out, just be there. It's the same thing. You notice the uncomfortable feeling. Right now, when we're doing this type of grounding work, we're focused on the feeling a little bit more. But you can also just, if you don't want to focus on it as much, just allow yourself to be present and not judge what's happening. Okay. Again, a ton of flexibility. What we're covering here is just general parameters, general ways of grounding yourself that are effective for making you feel more okay more of the time. Just being here with the uncomfortable feeling is very helpful in and of itself. In and of itself. So this is something that we can do. And it's something that we can basically rely on, in the sense that so often what we're running away from are the uncomfortable feelings that are in our body, like in the stomach or chest, throat, head, legs, wherever. So often we're running away from those things, and we can rely on a technique or approach like this, because when that stuff that we usually are running away from, when it's there and when we stop trying to run away from it and we do this instead, it's like we're flipping the table over. We're turning everything on its head. What we, in a way, most want to avoid, we now are welcoming in, briefly, at least, non-judgmentally. And we realize it's not going to kill us. We realize if we're not judging it so harshly, it's just an uncomfortable feeling. Which doesn't necessarily make it any less uncomfortable at first. But we can become more comfortable in the middle of the discomfort. No judgment, we just feel the feeling. No judgment, the feelings here. If you want to, if the feeling was initially at a 3 or 4, and you start feeling more comfortable with the discomfort of the feeling being there, you can even gently try to ramp that feeling up, elevate it, if you will, to a 6 or 7 or 8. If you want to, you can experiment doing that. See if you can make that tightness in the chest more tight, more intense, or that feeling in the stomach or the racing in the head. And you might not be able to elevate it, but you can play with that even. Instead of trying to lower it, which is what we're usually trying to do, you can actually try to elevate it. Non-judgmentally, of course. we're in control here doing this, guys. In like because we're giving ourselves a big playing field, and we're not judging the feeling harshly and trying to run away from it, we have more control. So it's like, all right, here it is. It's like a 3 or 4, but I'm not running away from it. Let me see if I can even rise it up to a 5 or 6 or 7. See what happens. Maybe, oh, I can't do it. Okay. Or, oh, here it goes. Okay. And you feel into it more and you breathe into it if you want. And again, your eyes can be opened. Your eyes don't have to be closed. It's whatever. It's all whatever. We're just not judging it. You know, you feel the feeling. Feel the feeling. This is often like what we're so scared of or don't want to face. It was with us the whole day. You know, we felt stressed at work, or we had a bad conversation with a loved one, or we were worried about something we have to do tomorrow. And this feeling in our chest or our stomach or wherever we didn't want to face it. It was there the whole day bothering us. Now we sit down and we are one with it. we don't run away with it. We look at it and we feel it. We even bring it out more. I've talked about them several times, but I'll put a link below. I'm going to put a note down. I'll put a link below in the description. I've got a podcast episode of just David Hawkins and Claire Weeks reading from them describing this process. You know, David Hawkins probably more famously describes it as the letting go process. But letting go is a strange way to describe this, what we're doing, because it's more like leaning in. If we lean into the feeling and feel it, it lets us go. We don't let the feeling go, it lets us go. So I'm going to put that, there's several things we've done, but I'll put that podcast episode of Claire Weeks and David Hawkins talking about this. So just doing this, especially like if you know about self-improvement and manifesting advice and different concepts and principles, just doing this, leaning into your discomfort, leaning into it, taking time, perhaps each day, perhaps even several times each day, to be intimate with it and not judge it. Is hugely helpful for a lot of us. And again, this is something that I think most people can do. We think this pain or this discomfort is going to overwhelm us. Part of us perhaps thinks it's going to kill us, or that it means we're directly threatened by something. But then when we sit down and breathe into it and are grounded in this very mundane way, we realize none of that is true. It's just this feeling. And what usually will start to happen when we feel into it in such a way is it will gradually shift. It will let go of us, as David Hawkins talks about so well. And when it starts to shift, what can be interesting too is we can notice it perhaps going from like a 5 down to like a 4, 3, 2. And then when you notice that, if you want, you could even try to elevate it back up again and see if it lets go then. But if you sit with it for long enough, chances are it will start to shift. It might completely shift, meaning that you go from being stressed at like a 5 or 6, or perhaps even higher on that scale. Perhaps you were really stressed out, or like at 9 or 10, but you remembered you could still sit and face the feeling openly. And if you breathe into it, sit with it, perhaps after 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes of doing this, the feeling will have dissipated. And you will have gone from like a 9 or 10 down to like a 1. That can happen too. Very regularly, that can happen, quite honestly. But we're not rushing it. We're not rushing it. Because what usually happens with these type of significant, you could say, feelings like fear, right? It's a deep-seated, you could say, emotion, or something like shame. It's not just going to dissipate and be gone forever. It's going to come back in all likelihood. And what you're doing by this type of exercise or this type of grounding process is getting intimate with it in a way where you're no longer as fearful of it being there. Again, you realize it's not going to kill you. And you realize that you can live your life, even if it is momentarily there, for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks even. Especially if you make a practice of regularly sitting with it when it's there, or bringing it up every day to a 3 or 4 and just seeing what's going on with it, feeling into it, it will become a lot more tolerable. Your life, in short, will get better. And because of that, in all likelihood, you will start to manifest in the external world better things in your life in some way. You see? It's like that. But it's so mundane. So that's very simple grounding. And when we're doing that, and once we become more familiar with these feelings and realize they're not going to kill us, and realize that we don't have to judge them in the way that we often judge them with our head, and we kind of like separate like our head from the rest of our body, from our emotions. We separate what we're thinking, what we're overthinking, with like how we're feeling. Once we stop doing that as much and become more present with the feeling and be like, oh, this feeling's here. And Hawkins said something very interesting. He said, you don't have to label this even while this is happening. I don't have to be like, oh, there's this feeling in my chest. It's fear, or it's anger, or it's shame. Hawkins says you don't even have to do that. You just be like, oh, this feeling is here right now, or this feeling is here again, and I'll feel it. You don't have to make a story around it. Be like, this is my fear manifesting right now. No, it's not like that, Hawkins says. Interesting point, viewpoint. So we can do that. And then other things we can do. There are so many other things we can do alongside this. But just doing that is a great way to ground. In a similar way that just sitting with your eyes open or eyes closed and just sitting and not judging yourself for 15 minutes every day is a great way to ground yourself. Very similar to what we just went over here. Here, doing it, this approach is maybe like a little more focused on the feeling, right? And embracing the feeling instead of pushing it away. And playing with the feeling being there, bringing it up even intentionally, and then watching it naturally drop down. Breathing into it. But, especially once we're comfortable doing these kind of things, and it's not that hard to start to get comfortable and miss this momentary physical discomfort. Once we start getting comfortable, realize that we're safe, even though, our body feels uneasy, there's so many different things we can explore. This is why I talk so much about internal family systems, IFS, because that's a really interesting modality we can utilize to explore these feelings, especially if we're interested in using our imagination in the way that, people like Neville talk about, or people like Maxwell Maltz talk about. So, what you can do with a feeling, the feeling that was bothering you, that you brought up, and that you worked with and breathed into, if you wanted, in a non-judgmental way, where the feeling is just a feeling and you are still in control, in charge. Like in IFS, they say, like, the big you, the big self is still in charge. That's you. That's like me. Like I'm Big Tim right now, right? I'm the big self with a capital S, oceanic, peaceful, calm, mature. My uncomfortable feeling in my chest area, that's just a feeling. So Big Tim, oceanic Tim, the true self with a capital S, is just going to talk to this feeling in the chest if I want to do something like IFS with it. And oceanic Tim is not going to judge this feeling harshly. Oceanic Tim is just going to be curious about the feeling and ask it questions. And there are so many good videos and instructions, and Richard Schwartz talking about ways of doing this, using the IFS model. And there's similar modalities we can use. We don't have to use IFS, but general questions that we can ask. One of the ones I always like to ask is like, Big Tim can ask, like, this feeling that is in the chest that feels uncomfortable, that I've now felt into and I feel is there and I'm not judging. Once I've done that, I can ask this feeling, what do you want? What do you want? And I can listen. And what's very interesting is that often I or you will get an answer when you ask it what it wants. And it might be very quick. Not always, but if you start feeling something more and not judging it and just feel it more, if you listen to it more, you can then ask it questions, and it will provide you with answers some of the time, at least. Often, a lot of the time. It's like a small miracle in a way. And this is not just me saying this. This is like, that's IFS. Like that's like you will start getting answers. You can ask also these feelings. You can ask so many questions of these feelings. You can ask, like, what do you want from me, from Big Tim, right? How long have you been here for? Why are you acting this way? What is it that would make you feel better? And when this feeling tells you something, you can start to converse with it. You can open up a conversation. And again, we don't have to do this. We can just feel the feelings, as we were discussing a few minutes ago, and like what David Hawkins talks about all the time in books like Letting Go, and in books like Healing and Recovery. But if we want to, we can also ask it questions if it feels appropriate and what it wants. And what can I, Big Tim, do to help you? Is there something you want me to do? What would make you feel more comfortable? What would make you feel more safe? Me as the big self, as Big Tim, wants to make sure that you feel okay. And if you don't feel okay, I want to do my best to help you. Is there something I can do? How can I make it so you trust me more? What can I provide you? Now, obviously, it can be helpful to have a therapist or a counselor or a coach, work with you and help you do this when you start asking questions. But you don't need anybody but your big self, which is always there to do this too. It can help to have someone facilitate it for you without question, in my opinion. But it's something you're also entirely capable of doing alone. And often the best approach is to have a facilitator sometimes, and also to do it alone. So in IFS, they talk about how there are no bad parts, and how if you get to know these feelings that come up in the body, these uncomfortable feelings, wherever they may be, we start to relate to them more and become more friendly with them, truly. And we realize that they're actually usually trying to tell us something. And in their own way, they're trying to help us for sure. And often they've been there since we were kids. And they were ways we could cope with going through things that we would be unable to cope with effectively if they were not there. Help us deal with the trauma that we have experienced in our lives, whether it's big trauma or small trauma, it's still trauma. And again, we can do so much of this just by being, present, being still, breathing, being grounded, and feeling into our feelings. And then we open up this dialogue, if we want, with our feelings. So what I want to emphasize in closing, and then I'll take questions or any thoughts that people have, is this is obviously a non-judgmental process. I think I've made that clear. But not only is it a non-judgmental process, this is a process that we do not to get anything. This is not a process to manipulate a feeling. It's okay to suppress or, manipulate a feeling, especially short term. Hawkins does a good job, again, of talking about this. He goes, it's okay to suppress a feeling. If you're going through the day and you have a busy day and you have this feeling in your chest and you don't want it to overwhelm you, you can suppress it during the day. But long term, you probably don't just want to suppress it. You want to look at it more openly. And again, there's many different ways to look at it, but a very simple and effective, straightforward way is the way we've gone over in this workshop, which is to sit with it, to be with it, and to not judge it. And if you suppress it during the day, that's okay, because then you can look at it and you can even, if you do something like IFS, if you get familiar with the feeling, you can say, you know what, I'm sorry I didn't pay as much attention as you may have liked to you during the day. I knew you were there. I was trying to support you, but I had a lot of things I had to do at work, or I had so many things I had to handle. There were so many things going on, and I knew that we would have time now to be together. But I apologize that I was unable to pay more attention to you, but I'm always here for you if you need me. And I think you know that. Very often you're talking to these parts, these feelings like they're kids, like they're children, because in a way they are. And you, as your big capital S self, are again the one in charge and control. So, we're not trying to make something happen here, to manipulate, to force, to suppress. We're trying to listen. We're trying to be present. We're not trying to change. We're trying to accept. If you want to look at it from like a manifesting lens, it's like we're not trying to manifest something when we're doing this type of exercise or process. We're trying to be. And by being, we will manifest naturally a lot of good things, including feeling more okay. This is an incredibly loose framework, and there's so many different avenues we can explore. And I think, you know, a lot of you watching this will understand why I always say that these manifesting ideas in many ways are not that different than so many good counseling and therapeutic and self-improvement ideas. This is a good example of why that's the case. And we can integrate all of this stuff into our life. We don't have to be like, oh, this is a manifesting concept. This is a therapy concept. This is a spiritual concept. This is a self-help concept. No, they're all, generally speaking, hopefully getting at the same thing. A lot of us, I know myself, it's like we have such a tendency to try hard inadvertently. And this makes us loosen up. We often loosen up by facing the stuff we don't want to face. And I used to do that by being playful and, you know, anything to just kind of shake the norm, right? Which is great. I'm still all for that, right? But I've learned the last couple of years, particularly, that there's real value in just facing the fear or whatever it may be head on in a mundane way. You just sit down with it. So if people have any questions or comments, they're welcome to put them in the chat, or if you want to go live with me, you can. Again, this is being recorded, so it will be put on YouTube. Yeah, just so people know. Yeah. Someone wrote, thanks for doing this, Tim. I've struggled with feeling embarrassed in affluent neighborhoods, restaurants, etc., feeling like I don't belong and everyone can see it. May not seem like a serious issue compared to others, but it is to me, and I think this will help with that. Yeah, absolutely. What's great about first of all, that's a good thing to notice. And it's not a little thing. You know, I guess in this situation, I'm making an assumption, but like, I assume what's good about this is like, you know, you're not embarrassed all the time, but you get embarrassed in certain situations. What's so nice about this is that you can work on it, for instance, in the restaurant when you feel embarrassed, if you want, or as we just discussed, you can wait until it's later that night or the next morning when you wake up or whatever, and bring up that embarrassment some then, and just sit with it. And you'll become more comfortable with it. You'll learn about yourself then more, learn about this embarrassment. And again, if you want to, you can even converse with it. You know, Hawkins gives that great example. I think it's in Letting Go. Otherwise, it's in Healing and Recovery, of being scared of heights, which is like a similar thing in a sense where like you're not being scared of heights is not something that's like constantly overwhelming you, right? But if you go to a high place, you're scared of heights, which is, you know, a little bit like being embarrassed in like a restaurant or a nice neighborhood or what have you. And he talks about like, you know, doing the letting go processes. He talks about it, leaning into the uncomfortable feelings. And when going to the Grand Canyon, and when he first went to the Grand Canyon, he couldn't get within a couple hundred yards of the edge because he was just so terrified of the height of the canyon. And, you know, then he was doing this process consistently. He went back the next year and he was able to get like within 50 yards or 50 feet or something like that. And he's like, wow, he's like, I really noticed the progress. And then like the next time he went back, like a year later, he could go right up to the edge and look down or hang his legs off or whatever. And he's like, that's the process. And I love that. Yeah, that's like, that's what so much of this stuff is about. It's like the opposite of these like melodramatic manifesting stories. I mean, that stuff's wonderful too, but we hear way too much about that and not enough about what Hawkins related. Like that's a manifesting success story. Not being able to get, within a couple hundred yards of something high to being able to look right over. And it's the same with like walking in an affluent neighborhood or going to a fancy restaurant, that embarrassment you feel. If you're able to minimize that and greatly reduce it over the course of like, half a year, 2 years, that's real improvement. And what's funny is when we make improvements like that, Hawkins, I know, talks about this in Letting Go. When we make real improvements like that, it's gradual and subtle, and we may not even notice them. It might be someone else, like a family member or a close friend, who's like, oh, wow, like, oh, you're doing this now, or like you feel comfortable doing that. You've changed, but you've changed from the inside out so much that you don't even recognize you've changed. Really, helpful stuff. Thank you, Kay, for those kind words. Smart, I've been grieving since I got off my numbing SSRIs 5 months ago. Got into the ugly cry at least once a day, and I'm wondering if it will ever go away. I'm trying to manifest a job, and how does this help? There's a lot to that question, in a sense where there's probably multiple parts to that question. But I think that you have to do it to see how it will help. I think the manifesting a job is a different thing. I think that the ugly cry, at least once a day, embracing that, feeling that ugly cry without judging it, feeling it, and perhaps getting to know it. And I would definitely suggest going to therapy alongside doing this, and like probably doing something like IFS or some other similar modality with a therapist would be very helpful. Trying to manifest a job is a different thing. I mean, like my book that I recently released, Money Your Friend, there's some exercises in there that are similar, very much related to what we're talking about, that we could interplay with this. But just read that book and watch some of the videos I've done about Money Your Friend, and I think that'll be clear. Comment here, I love what you said about the feeling lets go of us. Also, not having to label the feeling. I often find it hard to identify what I'm actually feeling, and sometimes believe that unless I know what the feeling is, I won't be able to, quote unquote, get rid of it. So knowing I can just say there is discomfort is so helpful. Great workshop. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I really love what Hawkins says there about not having to label it. There are other really good teachers that talk about, getting more in touch with your feelings, that say you should label it. Be like, oh, this is my fear acting up, for instance. But I don't think you have to. And especially if you have trouble identifying it, I mean, that is just a label, right? If we're thinking about it. And so it can be like, all right, I'm just going into the feeling. I don't know what this feeling is, because you don't know what the feeling is ultimately. It's not like, oh, this is my sadness. No, it's a feeling. It's a feeling in the face. So you can label it if you find it helpful, but if you don't find it helpful, don't. Give yourself the flexibility and the space to work through this stuff more. Yeah. I think, again, that this is really a hidden key for a lot of people who get into these, law of attraction, law of assumption ideas. Is, people think that their thoughts create things, but even though that might be true to some degree, like the feelings underlying the thoughts are usually really what's dominant. And so it's like impossible to correct only our thinking and not to have our feelings change too. But what happens is we try to just correct our thinking. And unless we do something with the feelings, it tends to not be sustainable. When we work with the feelings directly, the way we were discussing, you'll notice the thoughts almost automatically change a lot of the time. And especially if you know about these ideas, or these law of attraction, law of assumption ideas, you know to be aware of your thoughts, and you'll find it probably easier to redirect your thoughts in a more positive way, positive direction, because you're more comfortable with your feelings. Being more comfortable with what's coming up in your body is going to make it more easy for you to redirect your thoughts in the way you want to. Because it's very hard for most of us to redirect our feelings. It's like, I feel bad. Now I want to feel good. It's like, good luck with that. I mean, and I've talked all about that. I'll give you some hacks to do that. But like, again, it's not sustainable for our whole life. For instance, like, again, and stop being serious. Like if you feel bad, right? Obviously we're using that term very loosely. If you feel very uncomfortable and bad, if you jump up and down and like start moving your body and talking like this and going like this for like, a couple minutes, and going like this, and you're jumping up and down, and you get really active for a few minutes, you're doing that really out of the box, you're going to not feel as bad. You're going to start feeling better. That's just about as direct a way as I know of to go from changing your feelings from feeling bad to good, right? But even though I'm all about that, I don't think that's sustainable for most people, because your everyday life, you're not going to probably be doing that all the time. You want to just ground yourself in like a normative way as well, in my opinion, a lot of the time. And this is a good way to do that. Another book I want to mention, I always mention it when we talk about this stuff, is Emotional Intimacy by Robert Augustus Masters. Very good book, just talking about being with your emotions and not judging them. Really, really good. And yeah, on my podcast there, I'll put that link below, like I said, for the David Hawkins, Claire Weeks episode, but there are several episodes where I explore both David Hawkins and Claire Weeks' work. Claire Weeks has that great phrase where she says, just float through the feeling. Float through it. Don't judge it, just float through it. She also says something I love, which is like, when the feeling's really intense, when it's like, at like an 8, 9, or 10, and you feel totally overwhelmed, like say it's in the chest area, right? Like sometimes this happens to me. I made a video recently, like I'll have a nightmare and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be like freaked out, right? Like my heart's like pounding or whatever. Claire Weeks says, like, she's like, do you realize the worst thing you fear is right then? It's that 9 or 10 experience right then. It doesn't get worse than that. That's what you're really so terrified of, is that. And you're feeling it right now. So if you recognize that and you feel that right now, it's not out there. It's not the house burning down that you're so scared of. That's something else. You would take action if that was happening, or if something horrible was happening in your life. You'd be doing something. Your body would be behaving differently than it is right now. What's got you right now is you're throttled up at like a 10 on the stress level, and nothing is happening externally. You just woke up from a nightmare, or you're terrified about going outside or doing this thing. It's that terror that's scaring you so much, not the thing. So feel into that terror, feel into that 10, allow it to be there, and then you can float through it. And again, Weeks would say, simple to say, not as easy to do, right? But you can do it, and you get better and better with practice at doing this. And this is totally non-judgmental. And the 10's there, and then it's not going to stay if you start being with it. And when something's a 10, it's trying to tell you something. I'll tell you that that's the case too. But you don't have to ask it questions. You can just feel it and allow it to be there, and remind yourself, like Weeks says, this is the worst that can happen is right now, internally. And it will pass. And then it will stop happening as often. And when it does happen, it won't be as big a deal. Kate says, what's been helpful for me is realizing that our thoughts and feelings are always changing. Even if I feel crappy in the moment, doesn't mean it will last forever. And not identifying with the feelings like there must be something wrong with me, I'll never get my desire, etc. Yeah. It's just a feeling. And so often, again, we associate the feeling with failure. So it's like, for instance, like I've got this feeling in my chest. I'm tense in my chest. This means I feel sad and angry and not expectant. You know, I have like what I want's not going to happen. This feeling's here. This means it can't happen. That's all a story. It's really just a feeling. And this might sound very simple or simplistic when we talk about it in this light. We're almost making fun of it, right? Laughing at it in a way. But it's not when we're living our life, because we have these seemingly overwhelming feelings that we play into and create a narrative around, and they drag us down. But it's usually primarily the narrative that's dragging us down and not the feeling. The feeling's just coming and going. And, you know, I also spoke about this somewhat recently. Like, I used to think like the feelings were so random when they came up, and they are still, I still might think they're somewhat random. But usually these feelings, when we have like oh, I felt sad out of nowhere, or I felt anxious out of nowhere. When we get into these ideas, when we start paying attention to our thoughts more, we realize it's not out of nowhere. There's usually little things that set them off. And that's all cool. We just recognize that more, and we process it more, and we sit with the feeling more, and we don't let the feeling be as big a deal. And we recognize, oh, you know what? This is something that my friend said to me in passing when I saw them an hour ago, that's bringing out some feelings I had about a situation a year ago, and it's making me a little bit anxious or a little bit nervous. And I'm just going to let the feeling be there, and, you know, and it will pass. As opposed to like playing into that nervousness and letting it, you know, ruin the rest of my day, for instance. Yeah, Kate says for sure it's the story behind the feeling. And again, who's creating the story? That's something we have some control over. Very hard to like control your feelings always. Much easier to have control and direction over the stories you're telling about your feelings. You know, because like if we want to get, again, use more spiritual, you know, new agey terminology, or just whatever spiritual language, I guess you could say, like if it's all good, right? If like the universe is good and all kind, if God is all good and all kind, what real problem is there? God, the universe, is not saying this feeling's in my chest, there's something wrong. God is saying there's a feeling in your chest. And that's fine. It's still God, still the universe. Everything's life-giving still. It's me deciding, projecting onto the feeling, oh, this means I'm not good enough. This means I'm never going to get what I want. This means this isn't going to work. That's what's screwing me up. Not just the feeling is just this momentary physical discomfort or whatever. And again, it sounds silly when we're talking about it in this kind of light way, but it's less silly when we feel overwhelmed and we start playing into the overwhelm. Which is why this is not a one-time thing. This is the work. And you start to like working with your feelings. The stuff you used to not want to look at, like for instance, my uncomfortable feelings in my chest, like this childhood part, this child part that gets scared easily when other parts of me do not get scared. And I used to frown at this childhood part for being scared, quote unquote scared, right? I realized it was trying to tell me something, and there was nothing wrong with it. And it wants to be listened to. and that it was in many ways like my emotional and moral compass of who I was, but that it also needed attention. And pushing it away and just telling it, be quiet, everything's fine, is not what it wanted. That was not it being listened to. Like if something's off in my life, what's going to tell me that first is that part. It's trying to help me. It knows before these more mature or adult aspects of me. And it will help me faster. It will solve it faster. It will keep me more emotionally in tune with other people. But if I push it down, I'm not only disrespecting it, I'm disrespecting myself. You can see this is a little bit different than like, all right, let's go out and manifest some stuff. If we manifest more sanity in our lives, in the way we're talking about, other manifestations happen too. We're always manifesting. All right, so we've gone for about an hour. Does anyone have any final thoughts or comments? Thank you all for joining live. Obviously, if you have follow-up questions, this is the kind of work where it's not like there's necessarily going to be like, all the questions are right now. If you have a follow-up question, as always, you can email me at info@radicalcounselor.com, and we can talk about it. Thank you everybody for coming live. Yes, everybody who joined live, thank you. Some great insights and questions. All right, so yeah, in closing, just remember you can always utilize this. Look at if you haven't already listened to it, that podcast link of that episode of David Hawkins and Claire Weeks will be below. I'm also going to put the Manifesting Through Difficult Emotions playlist as a link. A lot of you on this call live, I know, have already listened to that, but for those of you who are new to the channel, that playlist is going to be helpful. It's talking about a lot of the things that we spoke about here. All right, until next time, be well. And again, if you have any questions, I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. This was good to do.